Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, June 1st, 2026, and today we're talking watermelons and covering cover crops and compost coverings. Yep, so let's do it. All right, everyone, happy Monday and happy June, the solstice month, no less, the first month in the summer campaign. How was everyone's weekend? I hope it was nice. Mine was quite restful. Got to see some friends up at the Louisville racing game on Friday night, which was super fun. I kind of think sporting events are maybe my favorite way to socialize. Then I honestly didn't do a whole lot else of note this weekend farm-wise beyond relaxing with the family and puttering around the farm. I'm finding with the amount of work I'm doing right now during the week, 2 full rest days is about what it takes to refuel. Then it's right back into it with another big week. The tomatoes need trellising, still got a bit of cultivation to do, harvesting always, new plant starts, all the things. Speaking of tomatoes too, we got our first ripe cherry tomatoes this weekend, so that is about to pop off real quick. I didn't think I was really pushing the season much more than normal, but we're getting slightly earlier tomatoes. But I did start them. I did start the seeds a little bit earlier this year, and again, grafting speeds everything up, so that's fun. Otherwise, I think it is going to be a big week of ringing in June the only way I know how, which is jamming. What are things looking like up your way right now? Let us know, or better yet, upload a 20-second farm video clip to Dropbox or Drive and share it with Farmer Mike at no-tillgrowers.com. Always a highlight of my week to see those, no matter how big or small the operation. Super fun to see what you all have going on. All right, so it is Monday, where every week this year we are digging into a single less talked about crop in a series we're calling Planting and Raving. Today, the crop we're going to cover is watermelons, and boy, oh boy, am I excited about this one. I haven't always been a watermelon fan, not my favorite flavor of things. Like when I got the watermelon Jolly Rancher, I was always kind of like, thanks. However, when I started farming and had my first slice of watermelon out in the field in the middle of a hot day after a lot of work, it all of a sudden made all the sense in the world to me, and I don't know that I've ever looked back. In this section, we'll do our normal Monday thing and talk about marketing and varieties and all the things. Then in the third segment, we'll talk about planting and harvesting, especially harvesting, because that gets a little complicated with watermelons. All right, so watermelons are in the cucurbit family, obviously. They are basically large, round, sweet cucumbers, or cucumbers are thin, savory watermelons, however you want to look at it. And you guessed it, like most of the planting and raving crops, they are not among the more profitable crops in the market garden, not even really close. For one, they're slower than molasses to grow at 70 to 90 days to maturity, depending on conditions. Again, the faster the crop, the higher the profitability, thus why people grow radishes and lettuces and turnips and microgreens and that sort of stuff. You can get multiple rounds of those crops in the same amount of time it takes to grow a single watermelon. So speed is one part. Another part is yield. Heavy as they are, watermelon plants are only going to produce 2 to 4 melons for most varieties, and maybe, a few more for something like the smaller sugar baby types. And that's if they don't split or get disease or get raccooned, which is a thing. Market expectations is the last part of in the profitability equation. I've mathed it out on here before, but basically you have to charge like $50 to $75 per melon to match what you would make in lettuce or radishes or whatever in that same space. Selling a $75 melon, though, ain't easy. Though I did do that segment last year on the $400 melon, so maybe there's a market. There are 2 main types of watermelons, seedless and seeded. People tend to think of that seedless watermelon as some sort of like genetic modification, and they are not. Well, I mean, not really. There are no foreign genes inserted into the plant. Seedless watermelons are created when a watermelon parent with extra chromosomes, created when the melon is exposed to certain chemicals, a process called mutagenesis, is crossed with a normal watermelon. This creates a sterile watermelon, and although you might get a little white seeds in them, those seeds are edible and they are not going to create another melon if you planted them, or hurt your digestion for that matter. And full confession here, I really like eating and growing seedless watermelons. Like, I really enjoy it. We started because we thought we could, make it into a specialty chef item because a lot of times they just can't do anything with the seeded varieties. Like, it's really hard for them to process them. So that's why we even bothered in the first place. But I just kind of fell in love with the flavor of organic seedless watermelons and the ease of juicing them. And so kind of been hooked ever since. Now, in order to produce a seedless watermelon, you actually do have to grow a regular watermelon. They often send, in fact, a pollinizing watermelon seed, which make decent juicing watermelons, by the way, but just produces a lot of flowers for pollination. So you get this extra melon. It's also not marketable, but again, great for juicing. Then, of course, there are a million other melon options. If seedless is not your thing, fleshes of yellow and orange and pink and red and all the things. The seeded watermelons in general do tend to have more interesting flavors, in my opinion. No argument there. But the one nice thing is that you could technically grow one of each because, like I said, you have to grow a regular watermelon to get a seedless watermelon, so long as they are close to the same days to maturity. You don't have to grow seedless, of course, just grow the melons you like, but I like talking about them because I think people just avoid them when they are perfectly tasty melons. I hope you all will shout out your favorite varieties in the comments. For us, we do start melons in wind strip trays because like all cucurbits, we don't want the roots mingling too much, and they are a little bit too slow to just seed them in the field because then you're just battling weeds the whole time. You have to make sure the temperatures, though, are pretty warm for this crop to germinate, but because it's slow to grow, starting them in trays just gives us the advantage that we want in the field. Anyway, that's a good starting point on watermelons. We're going to drink up a little mid-show cocktail about composting over cover crops and then return to watermelons in segment 3, but make sure throughout to add your thoughts. Cheers, BRB.
And we have another round of delicious listener-submitted photos. These come from Barbara. Barbara writes, "Here are a few pictures from my plots at the community garden at Beaumont Baptist Church in Lexington, Kentucky. The garden is open to everybody. Corn started April 5th and planted out mid-April. Tomatoes, peppers, and basil with candy squash under insect cover. Candy onions and beets, potatoes in the background, sweet potato slips under cover to protect them from bunnies, carrots, and self-pollinating cucumber under cover." Thanks, Barbara.
Today's episode is brought to you by Grown By. Grow smarter with Grown By, the farmer-owned cooperative. Grown By is the platform for online sales of everything, custom and traditional CSAs, halves of beef, flower bouquets, wholesale to restaurants, and now Grown By supports in-person sales too. Their new app, Grown By Register, you can supercharge your market and farm stand, finally bringing together your online and offline sales and customer data. Grown By is proud to make local food accessible by processing SNAP benefits online and in person right within the app. Grown By helps you put your best food forward. Schedule a demo at coop.grownby.com/no-till. That's coop.grownby.com/no-till. All right, back to the show. A quick and loving reminder that if you, the listener or viewer, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes from us from Patreon member Jillian, who writes, quote, "Hi, Jesse. Thanks for the great info. I just got your book and I'm eager to dive in. I have a timing question. I would love to start the season with a spring cover crop, but the window between the soil being workable and our last frost date is short here in zone 4B. I would only have maybe 5 to 6 weeks of cover crop growth before I'd want to terminate so that I can use the beds. I have considered solarizing the beds, but everything is still so wet and mucky and I don't see any sunshine in the forecast. My thought is that there is still a benefit to roots in the ground. My other question is, if I do cover crop and terminate, how do I go about adding compost? Do I just top dress? What are your thoughts?" End quote. All right, great questions here. And I know I just did a segment on cover crops in colder regions, so I will try to add a little bit to that discussion here and then discuss the compost over top part of the question. So first, a spring cover crop, a cover crop that is sown in the spring for a later summer planting, in a cold climate is going to be really tough to pull off if you're going to need that space in 5 to 6 weeks. Not impossible, mind you, but there is not a ton that will grow and die in a short span of time like that in cold soil. The one crop that comes to mind is maybe peas. These are nice because they are so cold hardy, so they can handle, any lingering frosts fairly well in pretty cold soil, especially when small, and they will grow relatively large once the spring actually kicks in, which at this point it probably has for you, so perhaps this is for next year more so. However, in order to get that to work out with some relative speed, you could do a few things. First is soak the seed, if not bring it all the way to germination before sowing it. That will get a jump on any pests that may find that seed and also just get a jump on the growing season by many, many days. And just a note on that, what you do is you soak the seed overnight, drain it, then fill and drain it like just fill it and then immediately drain it a couple times through the next day. On the third day, if kept at room temperature, you should see tiny sprouts on the pea seeds, and then you can sow it either by hand or, put it in a big seeder. Now, you're right about solarization. It will need sunshine for several days to effectively work. Peas, however, are relatively easy to terminate with just mowing them super low to the ground, especially if you plan to cover them with a layer of compost. You asked about how to do that well, and maybe you just mean adding compost like for a crop, like if you were trying to fertilize the bed, which I usually do in planting holes. So if I'm planting, let's say, tomatoes, then I'll dig the hole, put the compost in, then put the tomato on top of that, and then cover it. So that's how I would get that into a compost. But if you're talking about like having a compost layer, like a deep composting layer or something, that's a little bit of a different story. Basically, you do want to make sure that that cover crop is dead before you cover it, because unless the compost is thick enough, some cover crops can, poke back through. And then covering it with at least a few inches of compost so that you have somewhat of a plantable bed surface. If you only lightly cover it, you will have some compost over some soil, which is not exactly, the same thing and won't be as plantable unless you lightly work that compost into the top inch or so of soil, which I'm all fine with. Sometimes it can make that compost better at retaining moisture, for instance. Those little soil particles do. Some other cover crops that you can consider that would fall into that, grow quick, die easy category is something like Lacy Phacelia, good spring grower and relatively easy to terminate. Grains are where you might run into some trouble. They're just a little bit harder to terminate. So I might stay away from those. And things like buckwheat are slow and grumpy when it's cold. They're very fast in the summer, very slow when it's cold. Anyway, I hope that was helpful, albeit a little bit late. Sorry about that. The voice thing definitely got me behind, but I'm slowly catching up. Sending you good vibes for the growing season, though. And what else would you all have included? Let us know. Otherwise, we're going to take one last quick break. When we come back, growing your own delicious electrolytes. You didn't even know that's what the topic was today, did you? Because it's about watermelons. Anyway, be right back. Today's episode is brought to you by BCS America. If you're practicing no-till or low-till farming, you know that heavy equipment is often the enemy of your soil structure. That's where BCS two-wheeled tractors come in. Built for small farms, market gardens, and regenerative growers, BCS tractors give you the power to manage beds efficiently without unnecessary compaction. For the low and no-till grower, there are two attachments that change the game. The BCS Power Harrow stirs only the top inch or two of soil to incorporate soil amendments and create a perfect seed bed without soil inversion or pulling up weed seeds. And when it's time to terminate cover crops, that flail mower shreds organic matter into a beautiful, nutrient-rich mulch right on top of the bed. To find your local dealer and see the full lineup of attachments designed for the way you farm, head to bcsamerica.com. That's bcsamerica.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Good Agriculture. If the season is picking up and the pile of receipts is starting to grow, you're not alone. Good Agriculture handles farm bookkeeping so you can stay ahead of the mess before it piles up. They keep your books organized each month, help you understand what's coming in and what's going out, and show you where your farm stands so you can make better business decisions throughout the season. If you're behind, they'll help get everything caught up. They also help farmers find funding and stay ahead of grant deadlines. You run the farm, they help the business. Learn more at goodagriculture.com/info. That's goodagriculture.com/info. All right, back to the show. All right, planting and growing and harvesting watermelons. So soil prep for watermelons is pretty straightforward. This is a hungry crop nutritionally, a heavy feeder, as they say, and it is a slow growing crop. So the soil needs to be well amended, preferably with some compost and maybe some feather meal or alfalfa meal for slower release nitrogen. I also like to plant it into a cover crop where I can for the moisture retention, though, of course, the weed control has to be good. I have a few spots in the cover crop where I planted the watermelons this year that I'm having to just kind of mulch over top after the fact, which isn't great for profitability, but hopefully will help the melons succeed. And I cannot emphasize this enough. They are obnoxiously slow. And like all cucurbits, you cannot walk in there once the crop is established and the vines are going every which way. So get the weeds under control before planting them, or at least before they take over the bed. And if you're using a cover crop, just make sure those weeds are taken care of before you sow that cover crop, or you will have to tarp it for a really long time to kill them. Okay, if you are planting seedless watermelons, you will have to be somewhat strategic about the planting pattern. Johnny's has a good planting guide for this that I will link in the show notes, and that they send you actually with the seed. The magic ratio is 1 diploid, that's like a seeded pollinizer melon, per 3 triploid being the seedless plants. So you're planting one for every 3. They can be interplanted in the row every 3rd plant, or just 2 rows of seedless for every 1 row of seeded in between them. Just depends on how you're doing it. For just regular seeded melons, you don't have to worry about all that. I like to plant them at about 3 feet apart, especially in dry farming situations, with about 5.5 feet between them. That would be around 1 meter apart in the row, with about 1.7 meters between the rows or so. Cucurbits tend to have strong lateral roots, so that space between the plants becomes important, not just for above ground airflow, but also just, so that they can get the nutrition they need. Also important, do not disturb their roots any more than you absolutely have to when planting them. If that were a tweet, it would be in all caps. Because when the roots of cucurbits are disturbed, they tend to suffer and sometimes just straight up die. So you have to be very careful with cucurbit transplants. Anyway, I like to dig the holes, work in a little bit of compost with the soil, gently set the watermelon plant in, and then gently cover it. Finally, I water them well because, drying out is not good with any crop, but especially with cucurbits. They're very water-hungry crops. Water will be the key throughout. Again, watermelons are very thirsty crops. It's kind of just right there in the name. So mulches will be helpful, but so too will irrigation. Ideally, you don't have to water them, at all, like in a wet climate, because that will cut down on any semblance of profitability. But if you do have to water them at some point during the growing season, drip is going to be preferred because wet watermelon leaves are a delicacy, in fact, to certain fungal diseases. If planting late or into cooler soil, I recommend insect netting until flowering to avoid cucumber beetle damage. Otherwise, healthy soil and good moisture will do most of the work for you on the pest and disease front. There are notably some melons that are more resistant to certain diseases than others. So if you have, say, powdery mildew or fusarium issues in general, look for resistant seeds. That will help a lot. Then, once established, keep them as weed-free as possible until you have big old melons out there. Now, for harvesting, people will tell you all sorts of things about how to tell if a melon is ripe. Tapping to listen to a certain sound, the yellow spot on the bottom, the change in color. Some of that can be indicators, but it depends a lot on, one, your experience harvesting watermelons. Like once you've harvested enough, you tend to get a feel for when they're ripe. And 2, the variety. Some varieties have a noticeable shift in color, but it's not always consistent, and it's not all varieties. So to me, there really is only one surefire way to know when a melon is ripe. The tendril will be dead or dying. So what that means is there is a little stem that comes off the watermelon, obviously. Follow that stem to the main vine. On the other side of the main vine, there will be a tendril that is sort of associated with that melon. If that tendril is green and healthy, the melon is not ripe yet. If it is browning and or fully dead and shriveled, the melon is good to go. Genuinely, it is that simple, and it is almost 100% of the time. Dead tendrils equal ripe melons. So carefully break the stems of the melons that are ready from the vines and take them in the back of a wheelbarrow or truck or whatever, so you're not carrying one at a time, and then store them. Just above refrigeration temperatures are best for melons. So if you have a warm part of your cooler, say by the door, that'll do. Or second best is the cellar. They won't last for super long, maybe a week or so, and will slowly ripen more and more in that time. Then it's just a matter of selling or eating, or in my case, juicing, or trading most of them to our neighbors to bring in a little bit of country currency. Anyway, that is about it on watermelons. Let me know what I missed or should have elaborated more on, and we can tackle all that on Friday. Otherwise, Monday, we have done it. We are done. We finished. Don't forget, No Till Growers is a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That is an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Big thank you to Michelle. Big thank you to the No Till Growers Board of Directors. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and my wife Hannah for absolutely everything in the world. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at notillgrowers.com to support this work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you sign up in the month of June, you get a shout on the show. So big shout outs today to Alice McMahon. Shouts for bumping up, Alice. Kevin Gale and Katja. Katja? I don't think people have to say it like that. I'm sorry, Katja. But yeah, big shouts to you all, and gets a story started for the week. So this week's story is about 2 young women who watch from a safe distance as a group in the valley below them are tearing out all the plants in the soil and opening up the soil. It looks very hard and very weird to these two girls. And so, but they can't really take their eyes off of it. It's just so fascinating. And after a while, you know, they fall asleep and then they wake up and they look down and the group is still in the valley, still in the heat of the day, pulling out the plants, looking absolutely exhausted. And eventually the girls kind of just run out of time and decide to head back to the camp, stopping every once in a while to wipe their brows dramatically, you know, sort of intimidating the people in the valley, and then they'll laugh and then they just keep going. Then when they get to the camp, there is no one there. It is burned to the ground. What happened? Well, that is for tomorrow. Sign up spending, of course, on These Woods Have Weapons. That's spooky and dramatic. We'll see what happens. Thanks for watching and or listening. We will see you tomorrow. It'll be a blast. Bye.
Hey there, it's Wayfair here, where delivery and setup are as easy as a few taps on your phone. You're relaxing in an old hammock, scrolling Wayfair's app, when you spot it, a brand new patio set. Next thing you know, Wayfair delivers it right to your patio and sets it up. Oh, you need a new grill too? All right, Wayfair's got you covered. With Wayfair's Room of Choice delivery and fast expert setup on qualifying orders, life gets a little easier. Visit wayfair.com or the Wayfair app.
Wayfair, every style, every home.